Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to be hosting this webinar with these two incredible women, talking about a really rich topic around mental health and well-being and how important it is to both understand and embrace within our workplaces. I feel like for far too long, it felt like it wasn't okay to not be okay. But our goal here today and going forward is to help drive change, to that stigma. And these two have some great suggestions on just how to do that. And so as we're going through, if you have any questions that you would like me to ask Andrea or Ashley, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat as we go. And then towards the end of the call, I will try and address as many of those questions as we possibly can. So we'll go ahead and start with introductions. So my name is Molly Preer. I'm the Vice President of Workplace here at OFS. I spend a lot of time just studying the workplace and the evolving needs that are required to make our places better, and then the experiences that our employees have within this spaces that they spend their day. I try to use the research to my best of my ability to develop products that work to improve the lives of those that interact with them. And I personally find this topic to be just so incredibly important to the future of our workplaces and in shaping them to be the best that they can for the employees that they serve. So I'm really excited to introduce to you both Andrea and Ashley. Ashley spent her professional life unfolded at hospitals. As a communications specialist, she speaks healthcare very fluently and enjoys making medical topics less intimidating to patients and their families. Her recently published book that we'll be talking about today is There's an Elephant in Your Office, and it does just this by simply using a simple metaphor to explain the complexities of mental illness within the workplace. Ashley provides workshops to regional businesses about mental health in the workplace, teaches public speaking at the University of Southern Indiana, as well as presented a TEDx talk at TEDx Evansville. This was on November 8th of 2019. So definitely check it out if you haven't seen it.
It's on the YouTube.
There you go. And then next we have Andrea. So Andrea is the Senior Director of Human Resources, WebMD Health Services. She's responsible for developing, implementing, and delivering on all facets of human resources functions. Andrea's expertise is gained from her HR experience across diverse sectors, including manufacturing and not-for-profit enterprises. Prior to joining WebMD Health Services, Andrea was Vice President of Human Resources for the Oregon Humane Society, where she provided leadership and direction in the translation of business strategy into organizational initiatives and human resource priorities. Andrea has a bachelor's degree in psychology with a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from Western Kentucky University. And she also holds certifications from the Society of Human Resource Management and received a professional in human resources certification from the HR Certification Institute. So as I mentioned, yes, these are pretty incredible females that I'm really excited to spend the day talking about this topic with. So, without further ado, if you all are good, we'll jump right in.
Yeah, it sounds good. It's always so funny to hear your bio read. Like, oh, it's so long. I've done so many things.
You've been killing it out there, that's for sure.
That's right. And I think one thing I want to make sure we mention is Andrea and I are sisters. So it's just the two of us. And so different last names now, same maiden name, grew up together, same house, all that fun stuff. So that's just a little insight, and you'll hear more. That's kind of how all this came to be, is because of our relationship.
Yeah, so that kind of starts a little bit into this first question. I'll address it to you, Ashley, but Andrea, obviously, definitely feel free to add anything else. But for those that might not know the book, can you tell us what it's about and maybe what inspired you to write There's an Elephant in Your Office?
All right, the short version is I felt like the elephant in the office. Okay, so as my amazing biography led into, I've worked in healthcare for my professional career, marketing and communications. And again, short version, this is a 1-hour webinar. There was a period of time where I lived with a couple of mental health disorders. And through medication change and stress, just all kinds of stuff, I found myself in a very, very, very rough place, which, as you can imagine, led to some performance issues at work. because one of the hallmarks of some of the mental health conditions is you can't concentrate, you can't focus, you can't get your stuff done. Employers normally like for you to do your work. So as I had these encounters, to me, I felt like I was in trouble at school, right? So that was my emotional feeling of it. And so after a couple of these meetings, the equivalent of, being called to the principal's office, I called my sister, who also happened to be an HR expert. And I said, oh my God, what is happening? Can they fire me? Am I in trouble? Like, do I need to leave? I don't even understand what's happening. And I don't know what my rights are. And I don't know what to do. And so we start having these discussions, and Andrea says, I don't really have the answers to this. There's not a lot of resources related to employees having some mental health issues and performance, and like there's a legal and an illegal, but we don't really have any information to help you get through this. So guess what? We decided to make a resource. And so that's kind of how it happened. The whole elephant thing came out of my brain. And then I dragged Andrea along and I said, okay, I have the lived experience of the elephant. Now I need you to bring in the HR professional experience. And when you are on the other side of the fence, how is it that you handle people like me? And so together, we have a very complete story. So you've got, again, the lived experience, employee experience. Then you also have the employer and specifically HR experience, because all the stories in the book, and if you talk to Andrea for very long, she's seen some things.
I have. And I guess the other side of that story that I would share is that we all know there's shame and stigma around mental health. And so imagine my surprise when my sister calls me and out comes this eruption of concern and medication and therapist and performance and not able to work. What? I never heard of any of that before. It was the first time because she didn't want people to know. And so it really just hit me hard that if I didn't know my very own sister was having these, concerns and troubles, I most certainly had no idea what was going on inside of my organization and how many people were doing the exact same thing and trying their best to cover it. And we had no resources to make that better in any way. So that's, I guess, my side of the story and how, obviously I did everything I could to provide resources to Ashley and even trying to find stuff for her HR people, but there just was so little out there that we felt very compelled to use this experience to help other people. And so that was in 2018, I think-ish, and we published in 2019.
Yeah. So we did all of this work pre-pandemic. And so it's kind of like, that's how our minds are now. It's like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we're like, there's a gap in the literature. We need to help educate and teach. And so we wrote the book, we published the book, we did some training, some speaking engagements, and it was great. And then there was this whole 2 years of suffering globally. And now people are kind of like, oh, so that's what you were talking about. This is rough. This is hard. I'm the boss. Maybe I should think about this because it's affecting everyone. We're like, yeah, right now, statistic for you, 1/4 of the US adult population, that's 64.6 million people, live with a mental health disorder. They have jobs. They're functional. They look like me. I mean, okay, so some days I look not this, put together, but it's still just me, right? And so I work where you work. And so that equates like 1 in 5 people have a mental health condition. 5 in 5 of you have mental health, though, every single one of you. So that's why it's relevant, no matter how big or small your company, we all have mental health. And some days it's really good and some days it's really bad. We got to know what to do on both situations.
Well, and 1 in 5 was the pre-pandemic statistic from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I don't think it takes any of us long to realize that that number has gone way up. And so you're talking 1 in 3, 1 in 4 who are dealing with something that is, observable. It's not just I'm nervous or I'm having a rough day, but we're talking actual diagnosable mental illness. And look, I mean, there's 3 of us here. It's that small. Right. I mean, I think that's so important because it's easy to think, 1 in 4 people. You're like, no, think of your friend group. Think of who you hang out with. You may not know it, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening, as I can attest.
That's correct. And that's where invisible elephants, that's kind of a little category we do in the book. And that represents people like me. We are functioning, we're out in the world, we're doing pretty well as long as we do what we're supposed to do and take our meds or see our therapist or get exercise or sunlight, whatever the case may be. I totally lost my whole train of thought, you guys.
You were cubicle camouflage, I think.
Yes, thank you. See, this is why this is a great relationship here. So I hid at work, right? I didn't want anyone to think I was anything less than the most amazing employee, the smartest, the best, the go-getter, the team player, the helper. And so you hide in plain sight. And so we coined the phrase cubicle camouflage because you can't tell from the outside. So I'm blending in like everybody else and you have no clue I'm there. So again, background of why we put all these resources together, because it can't just be me in the world living this.
I think that's a good point because you are ambitious, you are hardworking, you are accomplished. And I think part of the stigma is that societal and cultural assumption that people are lazy if they're depressed, that they just won't get it together and go do a thing. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's not a lack of desire or willpower. It's chemicals. It's in your body that you're just not able. And so I think that's a really important reminder that it's not a lack of desire or someone just, who doesn't want to work hard, doesn't want to get up early enough to go. And I think now that it's so critical and so many people are struggling that there had to be this reckoning where we can all acknowledge, oh, I get it. Or at least I know someone, so now I can understand it better than just the, assumption that someone doesn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that that's one of the most beautiful gifts that the pandemic has offered us is that leveling up of empathy, because we all have shared, not one of our experiences looks the same, but we all suffered through the same thing for the last several years. And so all of a sudden it is like, oh my gosh, you have this level of empathy for one another's feelings and emotions. And it's like, how do we continue that as life goes back to normal, so to speak, or whatever that new normal is, how do we continue to, and I think that's kind of the goal of this, one step that we can take in this webinar to really talk about is how do we just, level up on that and go, one, it's okay not to be okay. And two, let's throw out the stigma and make sure, that we really can talk about this within our workplaces, because to the point, 1 out of 4, probably 1 out of 2 or 3 now, are suffering, and how do we create environments that make people feel supported and recognize those different elephants as you speak about, which I would love you to give just a little high level description of those different segments and categories that you talk about, because I find it fascinating, reading the book on the different elephants that we categorize within the workplace.
How about I'll give a little synopsis of the elephants, and then Andrea, do you want to kind of speak to different things in the office and the culture that we can do to help people, address mental health? Okay, so there's an elephant in your office, title of the book, that sets you up for a metaphor, and the metaphor is elephants are people in the workplace experiencing an episode of poor mental health. And we talk about this continuum, right? There's a group here, there's a group here, and there's a group way over here. So on one side, I call them amazing mammoths. And the visual for your mind right now is a giant elephant, and it's balancing on this tiny rubber ball, like at the circus. Maybe you've seen that. Okay, so your employee is that ball and the elephant is something that's happened to them. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be stress from the pandemic, losing a job, health diagnosis, having a baby, having a pandemic baby, being at home with your small children for 2 years, right? Anything that is an external stressor that's weighing on you. Those are amazing mammoths. So they're not always going to live with a mental health condition, but they're going to experience poor mental health for a while. And so that group needs resources. They need, somebody to help guide them. Hey, take your paid time off. Hey, you look like you're not feeling great. We have this program. It's just trying to use social supports, whatever works for you to kind of make your way through whatever this episode is. So those are amazing mammoths. The invisible elephants, like I said, that's me.
These mammoths first.
What's that?
In order. Do you want me to give tools?
Yeah, that would make more sense. Go.
Okay. So now that you know what they are, actually a couple of very simple things that you can do. And this group is large. This is a group of people who are just, it's more than they can handle. It's more than they can cope with. Our regular coping mechanisms have shifted or gone away for sure. So the first very tactical thing you can do is just notice if someone's kind of vibe or their regular behavior is different. Now you have to know a person enough to know how they kind of regularly show up. But if you see someone that, no longer is on camera when they always were, or they don't talk to anyone and they go straight to their desk when usually they were chatty, those types of things, they were put together, now they're wrinkled, and not that wrinkling is bad, but this is a shift in someone's usual behavior over time. So you're going to notice that it just seems a little different, and it's maybe, I wonder if everyone's okay. The next is to actually engage and create connections, because loneliness is a huge determinant of overall well-being. And so the more you can connect with people, not just about the to-do list or the task at hand, but actually make meaningful connections, the more people are going to open up. And I will say, in all the presentations and conversations I've had, never once have I left owning that topic and people didn't come up to me and say, I have this, I've been in here. As soon as you crack that door open, people are more willing to feel safe to talk about it. And also, like Ashley mentioned, know what's available. The last thing anybody wants to do is dig down the intranet to find the phone number to the thing when they're in a bit of a spiral. So have a cheat sheet, a hot link, know your benefits, know what you have available to you so that you can actually use them when the time comes, instead of that being the starting point for a treasure hunt of resources that you need. And also take the time off and try to really disconnect. It can be hard. I know it's hard to disconnect when work is home and work is everywhere and it's in your phone or pocket computer, but the more you can take time to focus on other things, the better your resiliency will be.
Yes. All right. Elephant number 2, invisible elephants. Like I said, cubicle camouflage, they're hiding, they're everywhere. They're already in your office. Some of the most common in Mental Health America and NAMI, Andrea said that the National Alliance on Mental Illness, those are kind of the two national groups. One is more policy driven and the other, which is NAMI, is more like family and individual driven, and they help provide resources and training and education. So together they're representing the whole of us. So for invisible elephants, some of the most common conditions of people with a mental health disorder who are employed, again, we're talking high functioning, regular old people, have anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, and there are subcategories of all of these. These are the broad terms. Eating disorders is one we don't often think about, but there's a lot of that also, and PTSD. And PTSD isn't just reserved for military veterans. Anyone who experienced a trauma or sustained trauma through childhood, through a robbery, even a really bad car wreck, that can really alter how you process things. So those are the most common conditions that your employees may have that they have to manage over time. And so that's kind of the key, is they're in it for the long game. For people going through that, I hate to say short term, but shorter term than like your whole life, right? And there's an end somewhere. We have to just try to do what we're supposed to do so we can stay at our, best selves and at our high performing level. And so I'll let Andrea kind of explain some of the ways to intervene, I guess. But I just want you to know there's so many people that work with you who live with, it's not just depression, right? Depression is huge. But again, eating disorders and bipolar disorder and PTSD and trauma, over time, as we've been better able to recognize and diagnose those, so many people come to your workplace every day managing and dealing with those. And so when they come in and they may be like, look, I got to hide today, I got to zone out, whatever, take them at their word and let them be. They're going to be a better employee tomorrow for that.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say about this group in particular, if this is the only thing you remember, is that this group does not like surprises.
Yes.
People need processing time, and different people need different amounts of time. But, if you have something to share, if you have, let's say you want to brainstorm with someone or run an idea by them, this is just good advice, but for everyone, put in a meeting invite, give context. If it's not about someone personally, say so up front. I know I've learned to be very cautious, and as a HR person, not say, just fling a meeting on someone's calendar with no information, or say, come in my office and shut the door, because that leads to panic and worst scenarios, and I'm getting fired for sure, and that's very, very rarely the case. So give information, give context, give processing time. Also try to maintain at some level consistency. So that could be with a schedule, it could be breaks, lunch, work assignments. If a big project is coming, let people know in advance so they can mentally prepare for it. And let's be honest, things change all the time. I'm not saying everything's in stone and not movable, but if you know that you can't make that meeting in 2 days, go ahead and move it. Don't wait till the last minute, especially if you live with one of these disorders or for sure that someone might. And then finally, I guess the last thing I would say, which is also just generally good advice, but be clear. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So when you're setting expectations, when you're setting due dates, when you actually want a certain outcome, be clear about what you're looking for so everyone is on the same page and there aren't those last minute surprises that could then, send someone into a spiral because they worked hard and then something went sideways, and all that could have been avoided. Again, things change. We have to be flexible, but if you could strive towards consistency, being clear, and not dropping surprises on people.
Yeah. And I can tell you there's a whole section of the book that I wrote called Come in My Office and Close the Door. Once that happens, I will go in and sit down, and internally I am like in a jungle having to fight for survival, and I am not processing what my manager is saying. I don't know what's expected of me. I leave there and I have totally blacked out.
Yeah.
And it could have been just the most basic, easy thing. I didn't know that going in. So I was ready. Like my brain, whether I like it or not, is in fight or flight. But if, like Andrea is my manager, she's like, hey, I need to talk about, the project you're working on because so-and-so wants to add a chapter to it. Stop by. Be like, oh, okay, sure.
And then you're not activated and you can be more present and actually participate in the conversation versus all of your fight or flight defense mechanisms being there. And to be fair, like no one is meaning to do that. Right. But it's just a very simple fix. If you can train yourself to just give context and give time every time or work towards that, it'll be interesting to see if you see a difference in the engagement you get in those meetings, in those conversations.
And I think you would be shocked at the number of people who both need and will greatly appreciate the context, and just the advance. Tell me a week ahead of time, remind me the day before, sure, but let me know it's coming. And then I can kind of have a small freak out over it, process it, move through it, and then boom, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
My husband and I call that a buffer. So if our personal plans change and he is the one changing them, he'll call me and be like, okay, I'm giving you a buffer. 6 hours from now, what you thought is going to happen is not going to happen. So process. And I'll be like, what? It's changing. Oh my God. And then I process, and by the time I get home, it's all good. So same thing, but at the workplace.
What I think about, what I love about this particular group of elephants, I often use the reference to Winnie the Pooh when I'm talking about the future of the workplace. And I think as kids, we get to watch this show, and, to us, it's just this amazing group, this amazing team filled with a lot of different dynamics. But as a child, you just look at it as, just this awesome group, and that you enjoy watching, that entertains you. And I think when you translate that into adult world, and all of a sudden those same characteristics that made them who they were. So you're talking about every one of them suffers from one form of the other of somebody in this arena. So whether it's depression, schizophrenia, eating disorders, each one of them holds one of those traits. And what you see as kids is this beautiful team that make together, it's so easy for us to assume those are a negative part of who we are. But without us bringing that to the table and bringing that to our teams, then our teams are never as great as what they could have, what they would have been had we not been in there. So I think that, it's each of our greatness that we can bring, and, all those different dynamics that make us is huge. And so I always think about that show when I was reading the book. It was making me think about it because I've known those dynamics of the Winnie the Pooh characters. And I find that to be so relatable. I think we all can look at Winnie the Pooh and be like, I'm a Pooh. Or actually some days I'm like, I'm a Pooh, and then I'm a Tigger, and then I'm like kind of bouncing all around the place. But, I think that we all can, whether we've been diagnosed or not, can kind of relate to those personality traits. And so, but it is that collective, and without, if everybody was an Eeyore or everybody was a Tigger, that team wouldn't have been the same. We wouldn't have enjoyed that show. And so I think that there's something really, fascinating about that. And just reminds me when you talk about the group. So
I think that's really a great example. And what I like about that too is just the representation, because people see themselves there, an Eeyore who may feel terrible because everyone talks about the glass is half full, but I don't. And then they see an Eeyore and they're like, someone else in this world wrote this character and views something like I do, as an example.
Exactly.
I think the representation is really important, and I can translate that into the workplace, because one thing that Ashley and I talk about all the time is toxic positivity, because with our best of intentions, a lot of times people will, there's the
I just had your, I'm like,
we didn't
how
plan to
fitting
talk
is
about that.
this?
We did not plan to talk about that. That is so crazy.
Yes, toxic positivity.
But Eeyore would not like toxic positivity.
No.
Just bring it full circle, because what that phrase means, if you're not familiar, is when you're in the workplace, in this instance, and the only feelings allowed, the only messages are positive vibes only, look at the bright side, it'll be okay, other people have it worse, you've got good things going. Now, none of those are inherently bad. You haven't ruined anyone if you've said any of those things before. How, if those are the only things allowed, and no one is allowed to have a bad day, well, that's just not even human. Like, we are a full spectrum of emotions, and if you squash all of them but the positive ones, you're missing out on all the Eeyores and all the creative energy and that perspective and representation in your products, in your clients, and just in your culture and your dynamics.
Yeah, I love that.
All right, we have one more elephant to go, and this one is exactly what it sounds like. Rampaging pachyderms. You are watching something unfold in the workplace and you are mouth open going, what just happened? So this is a person, and they may have a diagnosis, they may not, that is kind of irrelevant. They have this huge bout of intense emotion in a work setting. So it could appear very, in different ways. So could it be someone very angry and throwing a phone or throwing their chair, having this anger outburst? Yes, it could be that. Could it be passive aggressive? And this is one of the updates for edition 2 is talking about remote and virtual employees. There are some people who are not very nice in the chat. Now, I'm not talking about this chat. I'm talking about in a work meeting. It is passive aggressive to the nth degree, and that's just not nice. It's like mean girls, middle school behavior, and that's just not acceptable. So you can, again, if that happens a little bit, that's not necessarily this rampaging pachyderm. This is something so huge, it really upsets everyone. And another example could be social media. Andrea had an experience one time with a very disgruntled employee who literally put her on blast on the internet, on social media by name, and how she was ruining her life and all this stuff. Yeah. That's not okay. That is not okay. So when behavior like that happens, it is very unexpected. It's very disruptive. And you really need a plan on what you're going to do in that situation. And I'll let Andrea kind of walk through kind of what you can do in that situation. But what I'm going to say is, remember that the person having the outburst, they didn't plan on that. They didn't want to humiliate themselves in front of the whole workplace, but something went awry and it happened. Should they, get off scot-free? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying lead the situation with empathy, with compassion, that clearly that person is having a really rough time and they need to be tended to. But also the people who witnessed it are going to struggle with that, because it could be, I'm just use myself as an example. If I stood up in the middle of my office and I start throwing stuff and screaming obscenities, that is very out of character for me. The people I work with would be very upset. They would be concerned. They would want to know what happened or how to fix it. And so if you are the leader, you have to say, okay, everybody, again, this employee, clearly something has gone awry. We need to get them help, but let me talk to you. This was also disruptive to you. This was hard for you to witness. Let's acknowledge that, talk through it if appropriate, kind of move along. But yeah, rampaging pachyderms. It is what it sounds like it is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the most important thing to keep it, well, two things. One, safety protocols, keep yourself safe, keep that person as safe as they can, handle the situation in the moment, document everything, says the HR person. But
document or it didn't happen.
But also, to your point, this is the worst day that someone ever wants to have at work. Nobody wants to cry at work. Nobody wants to have a mental break at work. I mean, this is just a really awful thing for someone to have happen to them. So as much as it's going to be upsetting and disruptive in the moment, and you would reasonably have a lot of negative feelings, if we can work towards understanding that nobody wanted that to happen, including that person, it does help to think of it with the empathy lens. But also, yes, super important. Of course, we're going to deal with that individual, but check in with each other, because you don't know what that triggered for somebody. You don't know what their past experience was with that. Maybe it's fine, but the worst thing we can do is sweep it under the rug, because then what that message tells people is something as extreme as that, you're not going to follow up with me on. Well, then I expect no support from you. I don't feel like you care about me as a person. And then your productivity, your loyalty, your engagement absolutely is going to decline after that. And so just be a person, check in on each other. Don't necessarily wait for permission or, now I'm not saying gossip about all the details, but I'm saying person to person, how are you? Do that, and you can do that coworker to coworker, but if you are a manager of people in that situation and they were involved in any way, for sure, you should absolutely check in. And the complexity of the remote internet, it is just next level. So that is still really kind of case by case, because was it snarky or did you project your tone onto it? I mean, it just gets really dicey. But if it's that obvious, as a rampaging pactor, there will be no questions about the intent. But all those little kind of micro passive aggressive things leading up to it are worth paying attention to, especially if it's out of character.
Yeah.
Well, can you give us a little, as we're talking about that, so there was a second edition that came out of the book that was post-pandemic, or kind of as we were going through the pandemic. Can you say just kind of just give some highlights on what changed or what you needed to add or shift with that was possibly different than the original book that was put out?
Yeah, I think the biggest section that we added and then sprinkled throughout all the chapters was this remote hybrid piece, because in the first book, it just really wasn't top of mind. Most people were physically in an office, and that looks a certain way. And you have different ways that if someone is having a hard time. So as I gave examples earlier, if someone comes in disheveled, or they don't say hello, or they're chatting in the break room, but now they're really oversharing information, which as a colleague, you have a right not to know about. But like their self-awareness isn't there. And those would be just things you can see. When we're virtual or remote, it looks different. I mean, maybe I love seeing pets and kids in screen, but if there's no separation and they're there all the time, maybe someone's having a hard time with their work-life balance and they're struggling, or if they're mentioning they picked up smoking again, or they're drinking and they're hungover every day, or their 85th Amazon package arrived for the week, that could be signs that there are some unhealthy coping mechanisms popping back in. So we went through and just added what it might look like virtually for the most part, and then also acknowledging the shared trauma. And as you kind of started with, we've all gone through this together, and things are different. It's like pre-2020, and then the rest.
At the beginning, it will date itself, but I wanted to capture as much of the statistics and the research as I could. And so Mental Health America did this amazing job of tracking so many things. And so I listed in there, 2 out of 5 adults said they needed counseling or therapy for the first time in their lives. Half of them didn't receive it. Diverse populations, marginalized communities needed services at higher rates, but couldn't access them. So the front end of the book, for all of you number lovers and statisticians, I tried to really give some context in there that could help frame just how large of an issue poor mental health is in our country. Now, if you look globally, it's bad for the rest of the world too, but our data sets are really based on the United States, and so I kind of kept it in that lane.
Okay, well, I'm going to dive just a little bit deeper, since you talked about the second edition being that it's really this kind of remote, lot more of this hybrid approach. And so I found it really interesting in thinking about the advancement of technology and how that plays into our mental health. You stated, while great for convenience, the advancement of technology actually made coping more difficult by eroding the barrier between home and work. So in this digital age, communication never stops. Whether we're living with a mental illness or not, I feel like this is something that's had a real impact on all of us. Are there techniques or things that you would suggest, as far as trying to deal with that as we move into this more hybrid approach and we're doing a lot more of that digital experience?
I have so many ideas.
I can give just a really brief and personal one. So a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was a political science major. I was very active in politics and college and all of this stuff. And I really, thought that was a path I was going to take. So I still am interested in a lot of those topics. So my Twitter feed is geared toward politics, law, legislation, what's happening, in the whole of Congress and the White House and all of these things. Starting about 2020, I couldn't take Twitter. I couldn't read it because it would put me into a spiral. And I mean, I would just read and read and read and read. And then I would have this visceral reaction of being so agitated and what's wrong with people. And, blah, blah, blah. And that has persisted. And so I know that I have to stay off Twitter. If I need to check like one thing that's really important or a headline or something, I do. I'll also say that I allowed myself to tweet during a Food Network competition series because I'm a big nerd like that. So that was my one little caveat. But know your triggers and know what can put you into a really bad mental space. And that doesn't matter if you have a diagnosed illness or not. Twitter can be an ugly place, y'all.
Yeah.
I don't need to go on there. Well, similarly, I would say the whole new concept of doom scrolling, if you haven't heard of it, it's just where you get sucked into the vortex. Now you're 2 hours in of nothing positive or good. And often it's the same type of information that is just negative and then building on each other, because guess what? Everything is super curated. And so everything you click on then allows more similar content to show up for you. So a couple things you can do there. One, it's not fun at first, but set time limits. Say, you know what, I need a break. I'm going to go on my phone, but I'm only going to do it for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And then set a timer, an actual alarm to alert you so you don't go down that spiral, because you want to be informed enough. You don't want to stick your head in the sand and not know what's going on in the world, but is it really benefiting you to look at that for an hour or two at a time? The same would be with your actual social media feeds. So one of the best things I did for myself, I went through, and anything that made me feel bad, less than, jealous, uncomfortable, like things that didn't make me feel better after looking at them, there's a great unfollow button or a button. And so when you do go into whatever social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you're doing, have it curated so it is a welcoming place that gives you affirmations, laughs, beautiful things, connections with friends. It makes you feel better as best you can. It'll never be perfect. The algorithms will get you, but at least trying to curate it yourself. And the last thing that we also talk about a lot is the idea of a beauty break. So this is, okay, you're in your work day, or you're done doom scrolling, whatever you're doing. You just need a minute. Your brain's kind of spinning. One of the very best things you can do is to try and capture that moment when you're on vacation, and you're like, oh, this is glorious. I wish I could stay here forever. Okay, well, find a photo of that vacation spot, or a cute animal Instagram feed that you like, or look out your window, find something that's beautiful and just look at it for 60 seconds and take a few deep breaths. And that will relax your nervous system. It will regulate your heart rate. It will let your body know that you're not actually running from a tiger, that you can relax. And so that's super easy. It's free. You can do it anywhere. And all it takes is really 60 to 90 seconds and your day will turn around.
Yeah,
babies, puppies, and rainbows.
Yes. Yeah. I was hoping you were going to bring that up, because that is something that I think Doug had shared with me after you had presented at one of the things he was at, and I have done it, and I can tell you it works. So definitely, it's such a, something you're like, oh, why didn't I think of doing that before? And it's like, it really does. Yeah, super easy, but really can change the game.
And it's on TV too. I think the Calm app, one of them has a commercial that they started running during the pandemic. And I still, if it airs, I find myself following along. It's this beautiful rain and it's so soothing. And they have this like 30-second clock on there, and it says, listen to this and breathe. And I do what they tell me to. And then the commercial's over and I'm like, oh gosh, that was nice. Yeah. I should do that more often.
I mean, meditating and breathing deeply is super beneficial for your mental health, but it can also seem really intimidating for people, because there's this idea that you have to sit in a certain position, you have to do a certain thing, you have to clear your mind of all thoughts, or you have failed. Well, news alert, like you're never going to clear your mind of all thoughts. Like that's not even realistic. So be present with it, but just try to be for 30 seconds. And congratulations, you've started meditating.
I've had it recommended to me to actually, if you're first starting, just because I'm like, I felt the same way, like how do I, possibly my mind goes a million miles an hour and I can't shut it down. And the advice to me was to, at least for the first, several times, is to follow an instructed meditation so that you kind of can follow along. So you're doing it by practice and it's shortened and it kind of teaches, you can do like beginner and all these different steps towards it that will walk you through it. So you don't feel the pressure of just being like, okay, shut down brain. And then you like, don't know what to do. So that's just another,
we have to learn, and actually approaching anything with a learner's mindset and with a mindset of curiosity can rewire your brain to more positive outcomes instead of getting your defenses, being hard on yourself, because that's just going to increase your defense mechanisms. So another tip I like to give is to talk to yourself in your inner dialogue like you would talk to your best friend or your pet, because you're not going to be mean to your pet. And so if you can talk to yourself with that same kindness, you are going to feel better and be less hard on yourself and quiet that inner critic a little bit.
All right, I'm going to give you for free $1,000 worth of therapy. Are you ready? This is something that I actually have done with my own therapist. So for those of you who actually live with some kind of condition, or it's the same intrusive thought that's always there, you name it. Okay, so I sometimes am a little too literal. So I named my disorder Barbara.
Sorry to any Barbaras out there.
Sorry, but it's what just came to my mind in that moment. And so what that does is it separates that negative voice, that mean lady, from my own self. So I can be mad at Barbara. I can yell at Barbara. I can tell her to stop it and go on with yourself, Barbara, whatever I need to say to address it. And I'm not damaging my own self-worth, self-esteem through negative talk. So again, it's a little therapy device. May not work for everybody, but it definitely has worked for me, because I'll kind of recognize, what is that thought? That's not me. That's not my regular thinking. Barbara, she's back, and then I can get right in my head and address the feeling or the situation and not spend so much time saying, I'm a terrible human. I'm dumb. I can't get it together. I'm lazy. I'm bad at my job. No, it's Barbara. She's terrible.
If you can recognize that it is not your internal true thoughts, I mean, that is a huge first step in acknowledging that inner voice, that inner critic, is actually coming from early parental figures, people who have highly influenced your life, people that is society and the messages you get. That is your inner critic. It's not your actual true self. And so by identifying, oh, that's Barbara or whoever, that's, popcorn. I don't like it. But anyway, then you can say, oh, that's not me. And then you can be more resilient for your own well-being. It's a great tip. Thank you for that free therapy.
Yeah.
You're welcome. That's at least $1,000. No deductibles, no co-insurance.
I love it. Okay, so we have a couple more questions, and I want to be able to get to the chat, but to continue on this, because I think in so many workplaces right now, we're trying to move into this hybrid approach more, and people are talking about it and what's that going to look like, that I want to make sure that we address a couple of these points. But so as this grows and as we have this, communication's happening a lot through computer screens, and so it's going to be, or it feels like it can get harder and harder to pick up on some of these maybe elephants or people that are struggling with their mental health or whatever. How do you recommend that we stay attuned to that and look for those signs and reach out to one another? What are some of the different tactics that we could use?
Pay attention to your people. That's kind of the basic premise for all of this. So even if they're virtual, even if they're remote, even if they're in the office next to you, I work in more of an open environment. And so I can see and hear way more than I probably would like to see and hear on any given day. But also that kind of keeps you in tune with if somebody, again, sounds off or is acting weird. We spend enough time with our coworkers, when they're having an off week, but you also know if it's because that one big project is due Friday and they're in, that last home sprint, leave them alone.
Right.
So knowing your people, paying attention to them, stalk their calendar. I mean, if it comes down to, did something just happen? I mean, you've got some tools there. And what would you add?
I think the biggest thing any of us can do if we're together, hybrid, if we see people only every once in a while, is to make time to connect, not about work. Yeah. Now, look, the coworker situation is fascinating, right? Like we may never actually hang out outside of work, but you know more about me than a lot of other people because it's a shared experience. And when everybody, went away or got dispersed, you don't have that same level of connection. So I think about all the people that have changed jobs in the last 2 years. Do they feel connected? Do they know anyone? Like maybe you've been able to keep a relationship going because it existed before and you have your, shortcuts and you chat and whatever. But if you're a new person and no one's reached out to talk to you because we didn't run into each other over lunch or getting coffee or on our way somewhere, it's isolating. And then it just feels like a job and not a culture, not humans, not people working together towards a common cause, which gives people more satisfaction, makes you add value, and actually increases your mental well-being because you feel like you're contributing to something with other like-minded people. So if you're only doing your work by yourself, you're not going to get that. And it's not just going to happen. You have to put the effort in to actually connect.
And if for some reason you are in more of an individual type of situation, so a lot of creatives, a lot of designers, a lot of freelancers, they don't necessarily have coworkers. Find a group. Is there a local design group? Is there a trivia night at the pizza place that you can go to? You can join me on Twitter as we tweet about Food Network stuff. There's a whole group on there. There's a group for everything and everybody. So if you don't have it kind of inherently built into your work, just find another little outlet because it is important. We talked about loneliness. We talked about connection. And that way, you're kind of addressing all of those things and maybe having a little fun.
Yeah, and with the past couple of years, so many groups opened online, which I think is amazing because let's say you live in a smaller area that doesn't have like a big group, or you're in a small town that the options are limited for connection. The whole world has opened up for you to find people that are more aligned with what you want than just what happened to be in your town. So I think that's a great suggestion.
That's awesome. Love that. Okay, one last question before I move over to any questions. So feel free to drop anything in if you haven't put something in the chat. But okay, so a very important point that was made was that we need to start acknowledging that there are employees in our office experiencing episodes of poor mental health, but that the information is not enough. Just having that information isn't enough. I think you said information without a solid strategy on how to apply it won't be enough to address this post-pandemic need for improved mental health support. So do you have any, few key initiatives that you would recommend managers or HR, take, to initiate this process?
Yeah, I'm going to give a really short one, and then Andrea, you give the longer one. I'm just going to say that there are no magic words. If you see something, if you feel like a person is struggling, you don't have to pull out some kind of psychology book from college and be like, I believe that your post-traumatic stress disorder is flaring up. Are you having a current episode? No, you can say to them, you're weird. What is your problem? If that's how you talk to them, then that's how you talk to them. There's not a special way. And so being able to just vocalize it like it's a normal thing is honestly our goal. It should be easier and easier as we move forward to talk about, I'm really struggling, or, I've got this kid and they're stressing me out, or I'm trying to take care of my aging parents. And I just, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And every single person has something going on. everybody. It is just it's a time, right? People are not okay. But to that point, yes, especially if you're a colleague or a coworker and you have a relationship, check in the way you normally would check in. If you are in a leadership position or if you're a manager, you do have to be a little bit more cautious because you don't want to cross that line into requesting personal medical information or making people feel like you're trying to dig into their personal history. And you shouldn't, but you want to stick to observable performance and observable behaviors. So we're not going to chime in on the rumor mill. We're not going to say like, oh, did you break up with your partner? Did you stop taking your meds? No. We're going to say, I've noticed that you're usually on time and things are slipping a little bit and you're getting later and later with turning things in. Is everything okay? Is there a priority issue? Is there a tool you need? I've noticed that you seem to be, agitated by the noise in the office. Do you need something to help you focus? Could we move you to a different location that would be better for you? Do you need noise
canceling earphones?
The ear. Like that. So open the conversation. And to be clear, that person can't say nothing, right? It's their right to be like, I'm good, and deal with it on their own because they're an adult. However, if you open the door and you're like, I am a person that will help you and I'm here if you want to talk or if you need something to make it easier, that is the most critical first step. It's just making it okay to talk about. And then, like I mentioned earlier, have a cheat sheet, a hot link, post the phone number, have it tagged somewhere. If you have resources that are available to everyone, make them known, encourage people to take time off, do some of those things we talked about earlier.
And we've got a whole 3-step process for managers. We can go into so much more detail and strategy about this, but we'll leave that for another time.
Well, and as I shared with you guys when we chatted, just reading the book prompted me to go to our own HR team and ask, what are our resources? What I had never, I hadn't asked the question and, I wasn't really familiar with. And so I was able to find out a lot of information. And I was like, because some of the things that were talked about in the book, like the EAP programs and PIP and, some of these, things that I was like, oh, it's so great and so refreshing. So I love that you're like, post this stuff up, like, because sometimes it feels hidden. And so you feel, and I was nervous to just write the HR and go, hey, what are our policies? And, to help kind of bring that stigma out, let's post it up, share it out, make it okay. So I love that idea as well, just to make it just more accessible.
That's the only way it'll change is if we make it out in the open and okay to talk about, because otherwise it'll be status quo in the shadows and people will suffer.
Yeah.
Awesome. We do have a couple questions. I know we have like 1 minute left. So the one at the top was, in this world of everything being filmed and posted and all the social media things that are out there, are there legal boundaries to anything that, when you're addressing some of these things?
Definitely. Medical health information is protected. We're not going to ask people. We're not going to request anything in writing. However, if you see something, go to your HR person. If you don't have an HR person, go to your manager. You got to just say, this is seeming odd to me. And then there are lots of rules around it, but I don't want that to keep people from checking in on each other. It's just, notify someone if it looks off, and then do your best to, just check in with each other.
It's like you said, we're human, right? Let's just be human with each other.
I am also scrolling, so forgive my wandering eyes over here. And please, if you need, I want to be respectful of time. If you got to go, you can jump off here and you will not hurt our feelings one bit. So you have permission to get off. Can we do a plug? Andrea put it over in the comments. WebMD has an HR podcast, the HR Scoop, and she has a very special guest on there this week. It's me. So if you like listening to us talk about, oh my gosh, we can talk about anything. We'll do it again when does it come out? Thursday?
Thursday. Yeah.
Thursday.
Awesome. And another podcast that was done, Andrea did a podcast with our very own Doug Shapiro. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. But just an opportunity, just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you to Andrea, to you, Ashley, for joining us today. Thank you to everybody for joining the webinar. We really hope that you found it relevant and, we're able to take some nice takeaways away from it. I know there were several questions. We will be sending out a recording, and just to hope that you can share that with anyone that you think would benefit from listening to it. But also within that summary and sending out the recording, we will also be sending out a link where you can order their book. There's an elephant in your office, and there's a promo code attached to it that will give you a 15% discount. So definitely check that out. It will be Imagine15 will be the promo code, but we'll give you all that information when we send out the recording. And then also one last thing is that if you haven't, please join our Well Plus Being LinkedIn group. We will continue to, it's been a great place for a lot of these conversations to take place, and we plan to do a whole lot more of it. So please join us in that group as we continue this rich discussion, as well as so much more on that. So you can also search it Well Plus Being on LinkedIn, but it will also be in the link when we send the recording. So unless there's anything else, I just want to thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks. I just love everybody over here in the comments. So I also teach. So my goal through all of this is to teach and share knowledge. And it looks like we taught you something today, and that makes me so happy. So thank you for learning.
Yes, there's been so many incredible comments made of really appreciating this conversation. So thank you guys so much for being so open with us and sharing all this great information. It really means a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, guys. We'll see ya.
Bye.